G'day. Recently on LinkedIn, I put it out there for people to send me questions in that they'd like me to answer, and we got a lot of likes, 400 likes for this. We got hundreds and hundreds of questions that people put up to me, with some with commentary, some without commentary. And by the way, we've now got 100,000 followers on LinkedIn, which is fantastic. I think the LinkedIn program is a very good program in terms of people throwing questions around to others and others to reply and respond to someone like myself. But equally, I think it's a good way for us to actually come back and actually talk to people like a webinar style program. So thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to you. So what I'm going to do is on these questions, I'm going to say who the person was who sent me the question. I'm going to have to put my glass on every now and then because it's all in a small font. I'm going to read the question out and sometimes a commentary, and then I'm going to give you my view on it. If I can talk for hours on this, I'm going to limit this to half an hour, and I think that's enough for everybody to digest. Some of these questions I'm picking based on the number of likes the question's got and or the number of comments the question's got. But there are a few where there weren't a lot of likes and or comments, but I feel they're important ones for me to answer as well. So, but I'm going to pick those ones out as well. And for all of those of you who sent me a question and took the time to put in a commentary and or a question, I apologise if I don't do cover it off today, but I can't do everything. But all of them are great. All of them are here in front of me. I've read every single one of them. I've read all your commentary. Very insightful. I really appreciate it. So let's go to the first one. This is from Ivan Brewer. Ivan says, Mark, how do we better support early stage innovation Australia? It constantly appears to be a process entirely limited to money. You have to have enough to get to a certain stage to get looked at. If the initial and often meagre in the scheme of things money isn't there, amazing ideas often just go by the wayside. Thanks, Ivan. That's a great question. Look, innovation is such a broad thing. It covers a lot of areas. But if you're asking me about innovative ideas that can become sustainable businesses, then that's a totally different thing. Because innovative ideas, generally speaking, just won't attract the cash. If it's an innovative idea, though, with a sustainable business model sitting underneath it, whether it's a disruptive business model or just a business model, an ordinary, normal business model, then you can attract money. There's always someone who's going to give you the money. But you're right, Ivan, money's the driver of all this. There are so many good ideas out there. I must get hit up every week on LinkedIn with hundreds and hundreds of ideas. And I read most of them, and I think they're great ideas. And people are always trying to get me to invest in them. But there is very little in terms of the presentation to me. There's no offer to present thing to me. Secondly, people don't actually know how to present when they do try to present. Thirdly, they do not know how to build a feasibility and or a business model around it. And generally speaking, the amount of research associated with the idea is just not good enough. So innovation starts off with an idea. Innovation, though, for it to become something valuable to society and to the person who comes up with the idea, needs to have a business model associated with it. And that business model must be well-founded, it must have good structure around it, it must be well-researched, it's got to be not only be believable but provable. And on that basis you will attract money. And that money will make the business model and therefore the idea work. And it works in reverse. But I take your point, Ivan, it's about the money. The money exists out there. There is a lot of money out there looking for a home, whether it's through crowdfunding, or whether it's through some of the managed funds and or some of the startup VC guys. The money is out there. If you've got a compelling enough idea, whether it's around technology and or innovating other business ideas, you will attract the dough. Okay, the next question. I might go to one of the more least liked, but one of the things I think is quite important. This one's from Mark Dibben. Now Mark says, Mark, a discussion on how the new Premier aims to improve housing affordability. I've got a strong view. As I've read the commentary, and I don't know what she's actually said because I don't know Gladys or the Premier. I have seen her around the place, but I don't know her. What I understand the commentary to be saying is that for housing affordability, for example, in Sydney, they are saying that she is simply saying, the commentator is saying that she is simply saying we need to increase supply. That's sort of makes sense because more supply, in an economic sense, more supply you got with a constant demand, the lower the price will be, because that's where the price is on the x-axis, and that's where the supply and demand curve meet each other. That will determine your price, and the more you push supply out, in other words, the broader supply it becomes, the lower down it meets the demand curve, which means you're going to have a lower price, theoretically. Bottom line is, if they started building more houses 100 kilometres past Camden, will people buy them? You know, like, there's no point building houses that people don't want to buy because they can't live there. What drives housing demand and where people want to live is jobs. So people don't, in this city and most cities in Australia, people don't want to live more than 40 minutes from their place of work. Now, if you want to do a greenfields development, south and north, or west of Sydney, obviously you can't go west of Sydney, and the government somebody wants to go and put in the infrastructure and all that sort of stuff. Usually it's the developer has to do that, and or the government. You've got to make it work, which means there's a certain price at which you've got to sell the real estate. A block of land with a house on it, or just a block of land and let someone else build a house on it. There's a price at which you must sell it to make it feasible. In order to make it feasible, you've got to have demand, a certain level of demand, and demand at a certain price. People will not pay if it's too far away from their job. So what the government needs also to do is, in these developments, is to guarantee, in a theoretical sense, that there's going to be jobs in those environments. So if I'm going to do a development, you've got to make sure that there's maybe an industrial park there, maybe as well as that there's a big shopping centre. Westfield opens up there, for example, and there's retail jobs there. As well as there being retail jobs, there might be a professional environment. As well as a professional environment, there might be an industrial environment, making sure that there's factory work jobs, etc., etc. As well as that, you've got to have water, you've got to have power, you've got to have electricity. So it's not just about simply saying I'm going to increase supply, and it's not enough just to talk to local councils to encourage them to accept the DA or allow the DA for there to be increased supply. It's a whole ecosystem that needs to be built, and the whole ecosystem is around, in my view, is around where the jobs are. People are wanting to live in Sydney right now, which is driving the price of rentals and driving the price of ownership up, because Sydney is where all the jobs are. If you look at the national numbers, the biggest job growth is in Sydney across Australia. If you look at the national unemployment numbers, it's in Sydney. If you look at the national participation rates, it's in Sydney, Melbourne, which of course is no surprise where the house prices and unit prices are so high. So if people are coming here for jobs, you've got to make sure that where you want your new housing supply to be, that jobs are going to be within 40 minutes of that area. End of story. So I think that's what the new Premier's got to do. She's got to build an ecosystem. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think it's sitting down and listening to a whole lot of bureaucrats who don't have any idea about it. I think she needs to hold forums, and she needs to get people in there to talk about this, and she needs to talk to developers and say to developers, what sort of price you need to achieve to undertake this big capital commitment to do this development. You know, what sort of price you need to achieve, and off the back of those prices, you know, like if a house is worth a block of land with a house on it's worth 700 grand, for example, if the developer says I've got to get 700 grand to get my return, then you know that particular individual needs to borrow around 500,000 to buy a $700,000 property. If they're borrowing $500,000, they need to be earning $85,000, couple altogether as an individual, $85,000 between two people or one person is this type of job. It might be working in a factory, it might be working in an industrial centre, it might be working as a retail centre, it might be working as a professional, I don't know. And then once you know what type of job delivers that amount of money, that will deliver that borrowing capacity, which will deliver that price to the developer who has to make the investment, then you know what sort of infrastructure you need to put in that particular area, and that forms your ecosystem. But that was a great question. It's a really important question at the moment, particularly in Sydney. You know, there are firemen, there are policemen, there are nurses, and we need these people because they run our system who cannot afford to live in Sydney. So if nurses, policemen and firemen can't live in Sydney, who's going to run all the services in this city? Who's going to perform services in the city? That's a great question. It's a really important socio-economic question that needs to be answered by the Premier. And maybe the federal government too. I mean, one thing you could say is, okay, anybody who buys a property in this new greenfields development has no stamp duty. No stamp duty. Maybe that's a thing that could be done. Or alternatively, you don't have to pay stamp duty unless you sell the property within 3 or 5 years. If you sell the property in 3 or 5 years, you refund us the stamp duty, or you pay us the stamp duty you would have otherwise paid. You know, there just needs to be some fiscal policy around this as well as planning policy. And maybe the federal government says, if you buy in greenfields and you take out a mortgage of $500,000 and you pay $50,000 a year in interest and you live there, that's your principal place of residence, for doing that, you get a rebate tax for the $50,000 that you're paying in interest, or part of that. That used to happen back in the late 70s and 80s. People used to get a rebate tax, particularly if you lived in external zones where government wanted you to live. You know, they zoned the city, they zoned the country. But someone's got to get off their ass and start to do something. This question comes from Elder Coro. Elder says, hi Mark, I'd love to hear your opinion and advice for women in leadership. Just today there was another article in the paper about gender inequality regarding pay and attitude in traditionally male roles. Women lose some career development time when having kids, as they are the primary caregivers. You've had some powerful women by your side over the years. I'd like your advice in the future for women leaders. Thank you, Elder. Age-old debate. We're not going to get around the fact that for a woman to have a man and a woman together to have a kid, the woman has to take 9 months off, or a period off, whether it's 9 months or 6 months or 3 months, and they do lose momentum. And we're not going to get around the fact, notwithstanding all the maternity and paternity allowance provisions that most businesses have to abide by today, we're not going to get away from the fact that in taking that period off, even if the job is reserved for the woman when she comes back, or for the guy if he takes paternity leave, it is reserved for the woman, that they're going to lose momentum. Now, they may well get the job back, but they're losing their momentum. So there is a number of factors combined that actually feed into why women don't reach the high levels of leadership that men ordinarily reach. Now, we need to solve for all of those. But, you know, like if a woman doesn't have enough experience because she's had 3 kids and she's had 3 years off in over a 10-year period, and she doesn't have enough experience and skill and enough glue within an organisation to take that top job, whereas some guy's been there the whole period, the only way you can ameliorate that position is actually to penalise the guy and give the woman the job. At the end of the day, what should be the criteria for who gets the top jobs or becomes a leader is who is best qualified, whether it's a man or a woman. The problem is they're not choosing a man over a woman. They're choosing an individual over another individual, but that individual who happens to be a man has the benefits of not having to take breaks in their role. That's my view on this, the whole process. Now, that may mean women who want to be leaders in their field, and if they're having a child and if they're doing it with a partner, may need to talk their partner into actually taking the paternity leave instead of them taking the maternity leave. I think there's got to be some ownership of women in this as well. I do not see any reason why a woman can't be a leader compared to a man in any role, in any job, anywhere. Some of the women that I met, like Gail Kelly and those sorts of people, they're as good as or better than anybody else in their field. So in terms of top levels, you know, Gail Kelly is as good as David Morgan, as good as Ralph Norris was. She's as good as anybody was in her category. But I'm sure she had to make a lot of sacrifices to get there. And I think that a woman like Gail Kelly must have tremendous support. And must have been probably very, very careful in terms of who her partner was to make sure that she did get the support to get to where she needed to get to. Equally, men who get to these positions, generally speaking, got great support, and it's the woman who's supporting him. So I think over time, I think women will get there, but I see no reason why a woman should not be there in every occasion. There's no reason. There's no intellectual issues. I don't accept this thing that men are better at maths and women are better at communication, whatever all the stuff that these people keep putting out as a whole lot of tripe to me. It's about the circumstances and about our society and the way our culture works. But pleasingly for me, I mean, I've got in our organisation, we've got a lot of women who are succeeding very well. And in fact, at the Yellow Brick Road business, some of our best branches are run by women, some of them. And some of our best performers in terms of sales and advice, and mortgage advice and financial advice, are women. Now, I'm not saying some, I'm not sort of being inconsequential some. It's a big and significant number of women are doing this for us in our organisation. So, and my experience with female directors has been excellent over the years. So, I mean, I've had some great opportunities of sitting with women who are very, very good at being a director or non-executive director in organisations that I've been a director of, listed organisations. I think it's changing, but the one circumstance we can't change is someone's got to take the maternity leave, look after the kid, whether it's maternity leave or paternity leave, it doesn't matter to me. Matthew Collett. When will the bank start helping small businesses rather than just advertising they do? The more incentive for government to assist with loans and financing. There is financing around for asset-backed or invoicing, but nothing around for small or early-stage businesses. This goes back to the first question, it's about cash. If you can't get cash as a startup or with new technology or with new innovation from investors, generally speaking, the other alternative is going to borrow money from a bank. Now, banks will definitely lend you the money for a small business if you've got security. They'll be lending it to you at a much higher rate. Banks don't want to take the risk around lending money to people in small business if they don't have any asset to fall back on. So let's just go through it, staging. You can borrow quite a bit of money to be used for the purpose of your small business if you've got real estate to back it up. So at the top level, the top of the cascade is residential real estate. You'll get a very good interest rate and you'll be able to borrow quite a bit of money if you have unsecured residential real estate to offer to the bank for that purpose, one. The next level of the cascade, in other words, a little bit more expensive, commercial real estate. If you have commercial real estate to offer to the bank, they'll lend you money, quite a lot of money, to be used for the purpose of running a business. But that interest rate will be higher than the residential property as security. The next level, the third level of the cascade, will be fixed and floating charge in favour of the bank over the business that the bank thinks is valuable, that in the event that you stop paying principal and or interest or you defaulted, they can come in and sell that business. Now, that won't happen you won't get that in a small startup because you won't be able to prove to the bank that this business is valuable. And generally speaking, the fixed and floating charges over a valuable business are businesses that are making money, are profitable and have a history of profit, which the bank feels as though that if they took the principal out, you, the individual, that the business still could be sold. And then they're probably only going to lend you up to 50% of their valuation of your business there and then. That interest rate is going to be quite expensive. The fourth level is asset financing. So banks will do what they call factoring. They'll factor invoices and debtors for you. So if you've got people who owe you money, assuming those people are good quality debtors, banks will lend against those particular individuals. So basically, banks won't lend anybody else for anything else. They're not going to lend you the money. And there's a reason for it. Banks have limited amount of inflow of capital. That's the way they work. So banks borrow money from depositors. They put it in their system. They borrow at one rate from the depositors. They lend it out at another rate to the borrowers. And they put a margin on top to cover their costs of running the bank and to make a profit, obviously. So it's a limited amount of money. If the demand for the money that they have borrowed, that they need to lend, if the demand is high enough from people with secured assets or assets that they can offer security, in other words, residential borrowers, corporate borrowers, commercial property borrowers, then the banks don't actually have any need to go further down the credit curve or further down the risk curve and lend it to startups and new businesses.
Higher risk curve.
We need to just correct me, higher risk curve. Well, in other words, take more risk. Okay, they don't need to. Even if you're going to pay 50% interest, they're going to say, "Well, we don't need to take the risk. It's too risky." So the only way that banks may do this, and I know NAB is very good at this environment. Some banks, depending on what particular innovation or technology that you're developing. Some of the banks, like NAB, actually have incubators and or have funds, Westpac has one as well, called the Reinvention Fund, where they will actually go and invest in things. Now, the Reinvention Fund is more a fintech style investment, which is what Westpac does. But NAB has its own fund and invests in all sorts of startups. So some of the banks are starting to do that. Now, I think what would be good is if the government could actually mandate the banks invest a certain portion of the money that they earn, that their profit they make, every year, and get a rebate as a tax deduction, so they have to pay less tax. So let's say a bank makes $8 billion CBA, more likely $10 billion. Let's say CBA makes $10 billion profit in 2017, and let's say that their tax rate is 30%, they would ordinarily pay $3 billion of that in tax. What the government could say is if you invest $1 billion of that money into a startup fund, and you must invest in startup funds in the next 12 months, we will give you a tax deduction for that $1 billion worth of investment. In which case, from an income tax point of view, CBA on that example would only have to pay tax on $9 billion. So it's a much better deal for the CBA. They get a write-off, effective write-off. Now I'm just giving you an example. So basically what I'm putting to you is that I think the only way we're going to get investment into early stage businesses, startup, is going to be through the banking community, as debt I'm talking about, it's through the banking community. And the only way the banking community are going to do it is if they get some sort of fiscal stimulus to do so. Again, it's up to the government, the federal government, to come up with these new ideas and these innovations. And really, I don't see why we couldn't encourage banks to do that as long as there's something in it for them. Okay, there's a question here from Julia May, and she says, what books are on your bookshelf and what are you reading and what are you intending to read? Well, I tend to read more subscription style things. For example, Harvard Business Review. I've always got Harvard Business Review in front of me. I read that all the time. I'm sort of religious about Harvard HBR. I used to read online, to be frank with you. I much prefer to read it the hard copy. I've got this book here. It's a doctor called Julia Enders, and it's called Gut. It's actually quite an interesting book about the importance of your gut relative to your whole body. I mean, we tend to sort of just think about brain and heart. We forget about the importance of our gut and how our gut actually drives our brain and our heart, and all by providing all the amino acids that those two things need in order to function efficiently and properly. It's a great book. It's called Gut. I sort of read this. It's one of those books that helps put me to sleep. If I wake up in the middle of the night, it helps me go to sleep. But it's a really good book. I can recommend it. I'm often making speeches. I mean, I make a speech on average in any one year once a week. Like I'm speaking at PayPal next week. I did something for New Zealand last week, or this week actually. And I'm always sort of trying to find inspiration about what I'm going to talk about. Once I get the briefing and I get the subject matter and understand their theme, I try to get inspiration. So I'm forever reading this book, Lend Me Your Ears, The Great Speeches in History, by William Safire. It's a really good book. I can recommend it for those people looking for inspiration in terms of making speeches. And everyone's always looking for inspiration making speeches, particularly startups, and even if you're just looking for some phraseology or how you position your speech. So I'm continuing doing that. And this one is you got to have a funny book. Here's a mate of mine. This is Mary Custis. I'm a great fan of Mary Custis, and her husband, George Betsis, is actually a cousin of mine. He and I didn't even know that our grandmothers were sisters. And come from the same village where my dad comes from. But Effie's a great mate of mine. And this is called Guide to Being Up Yourself. And what's sort of interesting about this is it's really cleverly written. It's very, very funny. She's a super smart woman, a woman I respect. She had her first child at 50 years of age, notwithstanding just trying for many, 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 many years. And I have great respect for Mary, and not only as a performer and as an actress, but also as a person. And but she's extraordinarily funny, like ridiculously funny, and this just makes me laugh my ass off. So, and she wrote in here to me. She said, "Hello," and "Hello, good, thanks." That's what Mary wrote in there. She wrote that as Effie, and then she wrote me something else from her and her husband George. But great mates of mine, great book to read. You got to read something funny because life's pretty bloody serious all the time. And I think the other thing that I subscribe to, I should mention to everybody, is that I read continuously Scientific American and American Scientific. They're two different magazines, but they have great technology. They continue to have great technology, and the technology is worth knowing about and reading about, both in a medical sense, about your body, about new inventions and stuff that they're doing at Harvard. And they're very short stories. They're like maybe 3-4 pages. They talk about how the brain works and all the new scientific discoveries around the brain, quantum physics. They talk about using quantum physics to run computers and all that stuff that the Sydney University is doing now in terms of using quantum physics to and using atoms themselves to drive things and make things work. It's a fascinating area. It's probably 20 years off from being probably developed, but it's going to change the way we do things. And computing power is going to be just through the roof once they get their head around this, and I find this stuff fascinating. Just to sign off, that's not the end of this. I'm going to do another one of these in a couple of weeks' time. Send your questions in. I'm going to try and cover as many questions as I can. I'm probably going to get through about 5 questions per session, but I do read all of them, and I pick out different ones. And I'm not picking them out based on merit. I'm really picking them out based on who likes them and who doesn't like them. So if you see some questions and answers, see some questions, put some comments up, like it. But I'm also picking them out on what I think is interesting to me and what I think I can actually do a good mix of. So something funny, something light, but equally something important in terms of policy, something important in terms of small business, something important in terms of innovation, government policy. We were talking about housing affordability earlier on. All those sorts of broader issues are important things I like to talk about, and no doubt you want to hear about too. So, and of course Donald Trump's giving us plenty of fodder and plenty of things to read. And I actually have to say our own Prime Minister's giving us plenty of fodder and things to talk about, including Donald Trump's note on his Twitter today, what a dumb idea, when he was talking about America taking Australian refugees that had come to our country, which is a bit odd given that last night I saw the government say on the ABC that that policy that they agree with the US to take the overflow of refugees is going to be maintained. Yet Donald Trump tweeted today it's a dumb idea. So there's plenty of stuff to talk about, plenty of fodder, and no doubt you guys want someone to have a chat about, so throw them in and I'll talk to you about it. Thanks very much. Have a good one.